My name is Clara, and I'm 36 years old. I run a quiet little antique shop nestled in the historic heart of Charleston, South Carolina. To anyone passing by, my life seems deliberately simple. I favor comfortable, worn-in sweaters. My car is a dependable Honda that's seen more than a decade of coastal roads, and my days are spent carefully dusting objects that most people would dismiss as forgotten junk. But in the universe of my family, I am the black sheep, a profound disappointment wrapped in the form of a single woman. I have no children, no career they can brag about, and certainly no prestigious degree hanging on a wall to be admired every holiday. My father, Harold, spent his life as a branch manager for a regional bank. He was a man who lived by a rigid code, firmly believing that a person's credit score was a direct reflection of their character. My mother, Nancy, was a retired high school principal. Her philosophy was that any child could achieve greatness, provided they attended the right college, chose the right major, and, most importantly, married the right person. Their shining star, my older sister Megan, was the embodiment of their every dream. She graduated with top honors from a prestigious university, became a high-powered attorney for a massive pharmaceutical firm in Atlanta, married a successful cardiologist, and enrolled her two children in a private academy where they began learning to golf at the tender age of 7. Their annual Christmas cards were perfectly staged productions that looked like they were ripped from a magazine, complete with matching cashmere sweaters and impossibly white teeth. And then there was me. I chose to study fine arts conservation at a state university. While Megan was navigating courtrooms and corporate mergers, I was lost in the hushed halls of libraries, poring over ancient manuscripts and admiring the delicate lines of 18th-century furniture. Art is a lovely hobby, dear. My mother once told me, her voice laced with a gentle but firm disapproval. But it doesn't pay the mortgage. I can still picture the faint tremor in her hand as she folded my college acceptance letter, her disappointment a tangible thing in the room. After I graduated, I spent 3 years as an assistant at a local auction house. It was there, in the background, that I quietly honed my skills. I learned to distinguish real walnut from cheap veneer, to recognize the subtle, telltale signs of artificial aging on a piece of furniture, and to pinpoint the exact era of a lamp, whether it was Art Deco or mid-century modern. I remember the surge of excitement I felt when I came home one evening, buzzing about a misidentified piece I had found, a chest of drawers undervalued by nearly $3,000. My father, without looking up from his newspaper, just grumbled, "Sounds like a risky gamble." At 28, I drained my savings account, took a small loan from a close friend, and rented a tiny, red brick storefront tucked away under the sprawling branches of ancient oak trees on a quiet side street. The gilded past, inside, displayed each Queen Anne chair and every tarnished silver locket like a sacred relic in a shrine dedicated to time itself. On my grand opening day, my mother arrived carrying a bouquet of plastic flowers. She glanced around the small space, her lips pursed, and whispered to her friend, "Hopefully, she gets this out of her system before she turns 30. From that day forward, I was relegated to the role of a supporting character in our ongoing family drama. Every holiday became a meticulously staged play with Megan as the lead, the brilliant lawyer, the flawless mother, the perfect wife. I, on the other hand, was met with questions like, "Is that little shop of yours still open? Have you ever considered substitute teaching? The benefits are quite good." I once overheard my father confiding to my uncle at a barbecue, "Well, at least she isn't asking us for money." What they never understood, what they never even tried to see, was that every single item I sold was a piece of history being brought back to life. An English silver tea service, which I sold for over $2,000, had kept me awake for a week straight. Terrified I had misjudged its authenticity. A 19th century music box, which I quietly sold to an elderly woman, made her weep as it played the very tune her mother used to hum to her back in 1945. They saw only dust and decay. They were completely blind to the stories and the history held within. But the deepest cut wasn't their casual dismissal of my work, was the suffocating, constant feeling that I would never be enough for them. No matter what I accomplished, I would always be Clara, the odd one, the unmarried daughter with no Ivy League credentials and no framed accolades for my mother to boast about at her Tuesday morning prayer circle. So, I learned to accept my supporting role. At least from the shadows, I was mostly left in peace. I never told a soul, not even my closest friends, that one of the very first pieces I sold at the Gilded passed silently unlocked an entirely new chapter of my life. It was a 19th century German pendulum clock I found buried under a pile of tarps in a dusty storage unit on the outskirts of the city. The owner just wanted the junk cleared out, and I bought the entire lot for $50, earning a skeptical look for my trouble. After a solid week of painstaking work, meticulously cleaning away decades of grime, carefully oiling the delicate movement mechanism, and researching the maker's mark engraved on the back, I discovered it was a limited edition piece by a renowned clockmaker, custom made for a German diplomat during the late 1800s. 3 months later, that clock sold at a specialized auction in New York for $52,000. I didn't touch a single cent of that money for myself. Instead, I immediately opened a private investment account and used the business entity to keep my personal and company assets completely separate. That was the moment of revelation. I realized my passion wasn't just an emotional pursuit. It was a precision tool, capable of generating real, substantial value. I didn't need my family's validation. I needed time, patience, and the unique ability to see the profound value that others so easily overlooked. Started waking up before dawn on weekends to attend estate liquidations, especially in the historic homes scattered along the southeastern coast. I discovered that many wealthy families in places like Beaufort or St. Augustine had no one with the expertise to properly appraise their old heirlooms when it came time to downsize. Armed with a simple notebook and a small digital scanner, I trained my eye to distinguish between cheaply glued together furniture and true colonial craftsmanship, between authentic engravings from the Federal era and the cheap reproductions that flooded the market in the 1970s. One of my most unforgettable finds happened in Jacksonville. An elderly couple was selling off the private library of their late father, a retired history professor. Tucked away among thousands of books, I found a portfolio of rare hand-colored maps from the 1840s, annotated by a British cartographer who had documented early American settlements. I paid $150 for the entire box of books. 6 months later, after a lengthy process of verifying the signatures and historical context, the collection sold to a private museum for $205,000. Victories like that were rare, but even just a few significant pieces a year, combined with the steady stream of smaller, profitable transactions from the shop, were more than enough to consistently grow my investment portfolio. I kept nothing under my own name, formed an LLC called Camellia Holdings, hired a discreet financial advisor in Atlanta, and, over time, I bought the very building my shop was located in. Not just the shop, but all 3 apartments above it. The small office space next door. Even the gravel parking lot out back. Everything was owned by the LLC. No one in my family had a clue. They still pictured me scraping by, barely making rent, keeping the shop open as a quaint little hobby. And I let them believe it. I continued to live simply, not because I had to, but because I chose to. Most of my clothes were carefully selected vintage pieces, some of which I'd found for $20 at flea markets but were made from exquisite French fabrics a century old. My car was an old Honda. It was lovingly maintained and filled with good memories. I didn't indulge in wine that cost hundreds of dollars. I did own a first-generation set of Baccarat crystal glasses that I had bought for a pittance from a pawn shop owner who had no idea what he was selling. Each year, I traveled to Europe, usually in the autumn. Officially, these were buying trips. But in reality, they were for me. I would spend weeks wandering through the museums of Florence or Vienna, reading old books in the hidden shops of Bruges, and walking through the Paris rain just to watch the streetlights shimmer on the wet cobblestones. I felt no need to prove anything to anyone. My life was full, just not in a way they could ever understand. I arrived at my mother's house around noon on Thanksgiving, carrying a homemade pecan pie and a set of antique crystal glasses I had just polished. Every year, I brought Megan a small, thoughtful gift with some historical significance. And every year, she would set it aside with a cursory glance before launching into a grand monologue about her latest legal victory, her newest six-figure contract, or her family's upcoming vacation to Aspen. My mother's home in a suburb of Atlanta was a monument to her ideals. A perfectly manicured garden, an interior styled like a spread from Southern Living magazine. The comforting aroma of butter and cinnamon wafted from the kitchen. Megan had arrived early, of course. Her massive, sleek black SUV dominated the entire driveway. I had to park my humble Honda down the street, where the autumn leaves hadn't been raked. "Well, look who decided to show up," Megan said with a polished smile that never quite reached her eyes as I walked in. "Good thing you didn't have to keep the shop open today. Huh, Clara?" I just smiled back and said nothing. I had actually left my new, very capable assistant in charge, but Megan wouldn't grasp the concept of delegation. To her, if you weren't physically clocking in 80 hours a week, you weren't truly working. We helped Mom set the table. She handed me a bag of potatoes. "Can you peel these, sweetie? Your sister is handling the presentation." I sat at the kitchen island, quietly doing my assigned task, just like every other year. My father walked in, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He greeted Megan with a wide, proud grin and gave me a perfunctory nod, his eyes barely registering my presence. "How's the store, Clara? Still afloat?" "Stim as always," I replied, my voice even. "Had some interesting pieces come in last month." He just mumbled an absent-minded, "That's nice," already turning his full attention to Megan, who was now mid-story about a multi-million-dollar medical lawsuit. Caught fragments like breach of contract, corporate liability, and emergency board meeting. My mother ladled gravy, nodding with a look of immense pride. Around 3 in the afternoon, we all gathered at the dining table. The grand chandelier cast a warm, golden glow, and the air was thick with the scent of roast turkey and cranberry sauce. Everything was unfolding just as it had for the past decade, a familiar, uncomfortable play. Until Megan said, "Oh, shoot, where's my phone? The battery must have died." I looked up. My phone was sitting on the kitchen counter where I'd left it. Before I could say a word, Megan had already walked over, picked it up, and swiped the screen open. A few seconds later, her face drained of all color. Her voice, when she spoke, was sharp enough to slice through the cozy holiday atmosphere. "What in the hell is this, Clara?" The room fell silent. She held my phone up in the center of the table, the screen still illuminated. A notification from Robert, my financial advisor, clearly visible. "Congratulations on the new milestone. Your net worth just crossed $15.2 million. See you next week to discuss the Charleston property investment." Oh. My father set his bourbon glass down so hard that the liquid sloshed onto the tablecloth. My mother's jaw went slack. Megan was staring at me as if she had just uncovered a federal crime, her hand gripping my phone like it was Exhibit A. "You have got to be kidding me," she seethed, her voice a low growl. $15 million. From that dusty little antique shop. I stood up and calmly extended my hand. "Give me my phone, Megan." She pulled it back, her eyes blazing with a mixture of suspicion and raw anger. "No. You need to explain this. Where did this money come from? Are you involved in something illegal? Off the books deals? Because if you are dragging this entire family's name through the mud." "Nothing illegal," I replied, my voice steady. "And it's more than I expected. That money is mine. Every single cent of it came from the work you've all spent years calling playing with old junk." My father cut in, his voice trembling slightly. "Is this real, Clara? You really have $15 million? I simply nodded. The entire room seemed to freeze. One moment, we were about to offer thanks for our blessings. The next, I felt like I was on trial in a courtroom of my own family's making. Megan finally exploded, her voice filled with accusation. "All these years! You let everyone think you were broke. You had Mom worried sick about your retirement. Dad constantly wondering if you needed a job. And the whole time, you've been sitting on a fortune like some kind of silent, deceitful queen." My mother whispered, almost to herself, completely dazed. "She goes to the grocery store in old sweaters. She gives the kids second-hand books. Her phone screen is cracked, and she's a multi-millionaire." I calmly took my phone back from Megan's hand and slid it into my pocket. "No one ever asked," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "No one ever truly listened when I tried to talk about my work. I wasn't hiding it. You all just didn't care to see it, because it wasn't about a fancy law firm or a big promotion." Megan let out a cold, sharp laugh. "Well, that's great. But now that we know, we are going to have a lot to talk about after this meal." As I looked around the table, from my father's bewildered eyes to the nervous twitch in my mother's brow, I knew dinner was only the beginning. We ate in a thick, suffocating silence. The turkey grew cold on the platters. The gravy congealed into a dull, brown film. No one touched the sweet potatoes my mom was always so proud of. Every bit of holiday warmth had been sucked out of the room, replaced by the looming presence of that $15.2 million figure. There were no congratulations. There was no acknowledgement of the years of silent, hard work. There was only stunned silence, and the quiet, frantic warring of schemes beginning to take shape in their minds. Of course, Megan was the first to break the silence. "You know," she began, setting down her fork and knife, her voice now soft as silk but sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "Sophia has this incredible opportunity to study violin at a music conservatory in France. It's an extremely competitive program. Clara, the tuition and living expenses are just astronomical. If you helped, you could make her dream a reality." I looked up and met her gaze directly. "You asking me for money?" "It's not asking," Megan replied, without a blink. "We're family. You have more than you could ever need. She has a genuine need. It's just reasonable sharing." My dad nodded slowly, as if this logic was perfectly sound. Mother sipped her water, then added her voice to the chorus. "You live alone, dear. No children. No tuition or daycare costs to worry about. Helping out your niece wouldn't be a burden, would it?" Before I could even formulate a response, Megan's husband, Mark, spoke up. He rarely contributed to family discussions, but today was different. "The truth is, Clara," he said, crossing his legs and leaning back with an air of authority, "you're letting all that money just sit in an account while your sister is struggling with a mortgage, 2 tuitions, and all the expenses of daily life. You wear second-hand clothes, you drive a 15-year-old car, You live in a tiny apartment above your shop. Do you really need all that money? I set my fork down. Are you suggesting that because I choose to live simply, I don't deserve to keep what I've earned? Mark just shrugged. All I'm saying is, if you're not going to use it to live a better lifestyle, someone else should benefit from it. What about the work? I asked, keeping my voice calm and even. All the years of research, the learning, the investing, the risks I took. While everyone was mocking my dusty old thing, I was building this. And now, just because a number popped up on a screen, everyone feels entitled to a piece of it. Megan shifted her tactics to guilt. Do you have any idea how much we worried about you? How many nights Mom couldn't sleep, wondering if her youngest daughter would be able to afford health insurance? You owe this family some transparency, the very least. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. That's rich. In all these years, not one of you has ever seriously asked about my work. Not once have Mom or Dad set foot in the shop since opening day. Every time I mentioned a new find, you changed the subject. And now, suddenly, I owe you all something. My mother interjected, her voice now firmer. We're not pressuring you, sweetheart. We are just suggesting that you use your incredible good fortune to help the people who love you. I looked around the table. Everyone was staring at me, their eyes not seeing a daughter or a sister, but a wallet with a heartbeat. A solution to all their problems. Megan spoke again, her voice soft and calculated. I'm only asking for Sophia. A small scholarship, perhaps. You could even put your name on it. One single act of generosity could change the entire course of her life. And after that? I ask. Then it will be Max's turn. Then your mortgage. Then Mom and Dad's new roof. What do I become? A bank, an ATM that shares your DNA. Mark sighed, showing his impatience for the first time. Clara, don't be so dramatic. You don't have to give it all away. Just, maybe 3 million. That would solve everything. You'd still have over 12 million to enjoy. I turned to my father, who had been silent for a long time. What do you think, Dad? He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at his plate. Your mother is right. We're not forcing you. But don't forget, we all would have helped you if you were truly struggling. Now it's your turn to help us. I nodded slowly, a cold, hollow feeling spreading through my chest. I had expected shock. I hadn't dared to hope for praise. I had at least expected some small acknowledgement of my accomplishment. Instead, they looked at me like I was a number on a balance sheet. Calculated, they divided, and they called it love. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon, pushed my chair back. Clara. My mother called out, her voice sharp with alarm. Don't you dare leave in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner. I turned back, my voice low but crystal clear. I'm not leaving. I'm reclaiming the boundaries this family just tried to obliterate. And I walked outside, without a coat, letting the cool November wind bite at my skin. For the first time in my entire life, I felt completely, utterly clear. I stood on the porch, fingers gripping the painted wooden railing. The November chill seeped through my sweater, but my head felt hot, buzzing with a strange clarity. Inside, the muffled sounds of clinking silverware and rising murmurs sounded less like a family dinner and more like a hostile corporate takeover. I took a deep, steadying breath. 10 minutes later, I walked back into the dining room, before everyone continues to carve up my bank account like it's the last piece of pie. I said, my voice even and slow. I need to make one thing perfectly clear. All 3 of them turned to look at me. Their faces a mixture of shock and indignation, as if a disobedient student had just challenged the principal in the middle of an assembly. My money didn't come from luck. No one in this room offered to help me when I was starting out. No one checked in when I was hauling heavy furniture at 6 in the morning or coming home after 12 hours covered in dust and the smell of old varnish. So why does anyone here feel they have a right to tell me how to spend it? Megan leaned back, folding her arms. I'm not saying you didn't work hard, Clara. But if you truly love this family, sharing shouldn't feel like such a burden. I gave her a flat, empty smile. I don't lack love. Lack mutual respect. My father put down his glass again. Your mother worried about you for years. We had no idea you were quietly building a fortune. Because none of you wanted to know. I stated plainly. Every time I mentioned my work, someone changed the subject or offered a condescending platitude. No one ever actually believed I could succeed on my own terms. Mark, who was now discreetly tapping numbers into his phone's calculator, looked at me with a quiet, cutting tone. The issue isn't that you have money, Clara. It's that you hid it from us. It feels like a betrayal. I nodded slowly. Anyone in this room knows what betrayal feels like, it's me. Megan slammed her palm on the table. No! You don't get to stand there and act righteous while you're refusing to help your own niece. I didn't even flinch. Helping is when someone asks with respect. This is a demand, wrapped in a guilt trip, and seasoned with entitlement. My mother's eyes were now brimming with tears. You're tearing this family apart over money, she whispered. You're all alone. No husband, no children. What are you possibly going to do with all that money for the rest of your life? That question cut through me like a shard of ice. I'm going to live, I replied, my voice firm. Exactly the way I want to. And if that life embarrasses you, that's a burden I'm willing to carry. Megan stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. You walk out that door today without agreeing to help. Clara, don't expect things to be the same. Don't expect birthday invitations. Don't expect to be at Sophia's graduation. I stared at her, my heart hardening. You're using your own children to blackmail me. It's not blackmail, she retorted. It's consequences. I walked to the door and grabbed my coat from the hook. My hands were trembling, a mixture of cold and rage. My voice was steady. I'm not saying no because I'm selfish. I'm saying no because I've learned the most expensive lesson of my life today. Never hand your worth over to people who can only see it when it has a dollar sign attached to it. My father called after me, his voice strained. You'll regret this? Sooner or later, being all alone will catch up to you. I turned my head slightly, hand on the doorknob. I already have a family, I said. Just not in this house. And I shut the door behind me, the click of the latch echoing like a final, definitive statement. I left my mother's house at dusk. My hands were freezing, but inside, felt a strange, liberating clarity. There were no more hushed whispers, no more calculating glances from my sister and her husband. There was only the sound of my own footsteps on the sidewalk, steady and sure. Each step feeling lighter than the last, as if I were shedding a weight I had carried for decades. Back at the Gilded Past, I went upstairs to my small apartment above the shop and sat by the window in the dark. From there, I could watch the soft lights of the street come on. I checked my phone. One text from my mother. You hurt us today. I still love you. Nothing from Megan. I wasn't waiting for it. I put my phone on silent, not to hide, but as a reminder that the voices that truly matter don't come laced with guilt and obligation. The next morning, I opened the shop an hour early. Not to sell anything, but to clean. To methodically put everything back in its place, both in the shop and in my own heart. Eliza, the bright college student I'd hired a few months ago, came in at 8 a.m. holding 2 cups of coffee. Are you okay? I texted yesterday but didn't hear back. I smiled, taking the warm cup from her. Better than you can imagine. And thank you for holding down the fort. Hiring Eliza, who was passionate about antique textiles and had an incredible eye for detail, was one of the best decisions I had ever made. I was now the mentor I never had. In the weeks that followed, I poured my energy into my work. I started a blog series detailing the evolution of American furniture. The website traffic soared. I hosted a tea and talk on the first Saturday of every month, inviting loyal customers and local history buffs. We sat among the antiques, and they asked questions like, "How can you tell real hand stitching from machine work?" They cared about the history, not the price tag. One afternoon, I received an email from a small museum in Nashville. They wanted to partner on a course about colonial furniture preservation. My name had been recommended by a professor I had once helped. That was the moment I realized it. I was no longer a shadow in Megan's life. I was my own person, with my own community. One evening in December, I was sharing a piece of apple pie with Mrs. Marie, 68-year-old owner of the bakery across the street. She was the first person to ever hire me for a professional appraisal. Told her briefly what had happened at Thanksgiving. She just nodded and said, "Blood doesn't make you family, dear. Sometimes, family is the people you choose, the ones who choose to see you." Later that night, I opened my journal and wrote a single line. "No one can cut you off from a world you built with your own two hands. I don't need them. I have me." January arrived with a quiet, resolute purpose. I hung a sign in the window. Antique Appraisal and Preservation Course. Begins January 14th. Within 3 days, all 8 spots were filled. My students were a diverse and wonderful group, all brought together by a shared reverence for the past. As I watched their eyes light up while I told the story of a table, once dismissed as junk, I realized I wasn't just teaching a class, I was passing on a spark. Eliza, my assistant, was now managing the entire storefront while I taught. One afternoon, she handed me a hand-drawn proposal to expand into the back of the shop, creating a dedicated preservation workshop and learning space. Evening, I called Robert, my financial advisor. We allocated $25,000 from my portfolio to create the Camellia Fund, an annual scholarship for students passionate about heritage conservation. The first recipient was a young woman named Lena, who had dropped out of a woodworking program due to lack of funds. When I called to give her the news, she burst into tears. "You have no idea," she sobbed. "You just saved me from having to go back to my job at a convenience store." Her words stayed with me. Hadn't saved her. I had simply done for her what I once wished someone had done for me. Believed in her passion when it was all she had. Thanksgiving came again. This year, I was the one who extended the invitation. I called my parents. "I was thinking," I said, "if you wanted, you could come to Charleston this year. I'll make dinner. Just the 3 of us." After a short silence, my father said simply, "Your mother would like that." They arrived at noon. My mother looked at the shop, now bathed in the warm afternoon light. "More beautiful than I remembered," she said. My father ran his hand over a mahogany table. "How old is this one?" he asked. "Circa 1815. I replied. He just nodded, but something in his eyes had softened. We ate dinner in my apartment upstairs. It was a quiet meal, not a tense one. No one mentioned Megan. No one mentioned the $15 million. When we finished, I handed my mother a small gift. Inside was a silver camellia locket from the late 19th century. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her hand trembling slightly. "You know I always loved camellias." "I know," I said. "You used to pin one to your blouse on parent-teacher night. I remember everything." My father cleared his throat. "We were wrong," he said, looking at me directly for the first time. "We were wrong to think you had to follow Megan's path to be successful." "Guess, I just thought it was the safer way." "I understand," I said. "And I need you to understand this. I don't need your praise. I just need to be seen as enough." My mother said nothing, but she gave a faint nod. I walked them out later that evening and watched their car disappear around the corner. There was no lingering ache. No old bitterness. Just a quiet truth. I no longer needed them to be the parents I once wished for, because I had finally become the person I was always meant to be. Thanksgiving was no longer a test I had to endure. It was just a dinner, in a home I had built, where I no longer had to ask for permission to be myself. My family may never fully understand me, but they no longer have the power to define me. Clara's story shows us that real worth isn't measured by family approval or society's benchmarks. It's forged in the courage to follow your own path and protect your peace. This is a powerful story of retaliation, where the most satisfying revenge was building a life they could neither comprehend nor control. What do you think of Clara's decision? Would you have done the same? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about family drama and finding your own strength.